Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's installment of our Tech Tuesday webinar series. My name is Kevin Marhine, and I am the host of the series. Joining me today, we're calling a little bit of an audible on you. Originally, we're promising Clint Adkins, but due to a scheduling conflict, thankfully Robert Lovelace was available. So Robert will be joining us today. He is one of our fantastic solution architects here at Coretek. If you haven't caught him before on one of our previous Tech Tuesday webinars, there's several good ones out there that I can recommend, but happy to have Robert here filling in for us today. Before I hand it over to Robert to sort of take us through the presentation that's been prepared, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Of course, if you do have any questions during the course of the webinar, there is the Q&A functionality here inside of Teams, so please feel free to submit your questions. We do try to save a little bit of time at the end of the webinar to make sure that any of those get answered. We are also, of course, recording today's webinar, so whether you're here in person and you've joined us live, or you're tuning in at a later date, we try to make this available to you so you can either come back and view it if there was something you wanted to double check, or if this is your first time viewing it, welcome. That takes care of all the boring sort of housekeeping stuff. Robert, again, thank you for being flexible and stepping up and joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to walk through the presentation.
Yeah, no problem, Kevin. Happy to be here to talk about Azure migration strategies today and really looking into how we move databases and making sure that you guys are setting yourselves up for success. I'm Robert Lovelace, as Kevin shared, a solution architect with Coretek. And it really, I'm responsible and I lead our solution assessment practice, or our part of the practice of our Azure team. And I lead our solution assessments and really getting to understand the digital estate that our customers have and how or what is the best way to move these resources up to Azure. We look at cost optimization, we look at performance optimization, and really setting you guys up for success on that cloud journey. So today, like we said, talking about Azure migration strategies, touching on really the overall focus of having a good strategy, but also getting more focused on the databases as well. So to start, I really want to start with some common terms in how we move workloads into Azure. And on the left, you'll see here, you have your traditional on-prem data infrastructure that you can manage completely on your own. Next, we have infrastructure as a service. So you then are starting to move different aspects of management or operations over to the vendor, in this case, Microsoft. So they're going to be handling the networking, the storage, the servers, and the virtualization, and you then manage the operating system on up. In the next model, you have platform as a service. So this is where the vendor, or like I said, Microsoft is now taking over the application layer, or the middleware application layer, operating system and runtime. So you don't necessarily have to worry about patching SQL. You can just worry about your data and the applications that reference that data in SQL as an example. And then the third is software as a service. And here's where you're paying for a complete service where you don't have to worry about the applications, the data. You just pay for that service. The overall support of that service is managed completely by the vendor. So another way is, how do we move that data to Azure? So the last slide was focusing on where it lands and the different options we have for landing that data in Azure. This is really how do we move, and there's four primary ways to move data to Azure. And a lot of customers that we work with, and it depends on what they're trying to achieve with their migration and maybe how the timeline that they have to migrate. Obviously, if there's something like a data center exit, they might not have a timeline to really get into a re-architect or rebuild. So we look at Rehost, and that's essentially take the environment as it is today and move it up to Azure. We're not looking at changing any applications. We're not patching. We're not moving from Server 2008 to Server 2019. We're taking it as it is today and moving it to Azure. The second is refactor, and this is where we have minimal changes to really take advantage of the cloud. Maybe it's changing some basic application code to take more full advantage of the cloud and the capabilities that it offers. And the third is re-architect, and this is where you're actually looking at how your application or your environment performs today, and really how you can make tweaks and changes to really capitalize on the Azure offerings. So maybe in a re-architect, we're looking at moving from a completely managed SQL database on-prem into something like a managed instance in Azure. What does it take to move that database into a managed instance? How does our application now reference that data that it's in a managed instance, and re-architecting what we have? And then the fourth is the rebuild. Rebuild, we're not moving our databases, we're starting from fresh. So what does it take to really do an assessment of what we have, and how do we need to just completely revamp what we have without moving anything but building from new? The next piece is really looking at what does it take when we're looking at an Azure migration. What do we really need to? I'm not getting into necessarily the technology of the applications, but what do we need to be successful in Azure? And it starts with the people. It's a lot of organizations are starting to ask about Cloud Center of Excellence, or what does it take to create a Center of Excellence? And it's really understanding the roles that are going to be key stakeholders in making decisions for the cloud environment, and then enabling the team to make change, to leveraging the native tools in Azure to create governance around what we have, but enabling people to really grow the environment and make change within the environment rather than restricting them. Planning and process, it's going to be really important, and we're always looking at where we're at today and how we're trying to evolve our business and prepare for it. So all of the changes that we are all of the decisions that we have to make, we need to make sure that we're making those decisions in preparation for the future. And then technology is going to be important. Choosing the right tools for security, governance, and operations to really allow us to evolve and to allow our people to really be able to be enabled to work within the Azure environment. So we're not restricting, we're not trying to put handcuffs on anybody, but really allow them to, based on these are the decisions that need to be made, this is the governance, this is the policy around those decisions, and allowing them to make the decisions if they stay within the boundaries. So next we look at databases or data in Azure, and there's a couple options here. And many of you, if you're still on-prem today, running SQL databases, maybe it's a Cosmos DB, but you have your database on-prem today, and it's for relational data. And maybe it's small, and maybe when you're moving to Azure, it makes sense to keep it in a SQL database. But for organizations that are dealing with larger data, and you look at what's creating data now, just about everything. So I know with Internet of Things, IoT, smart connected devices are really starting to create a lot of data. And so we're looking at now, how do we store that data in data lakes? And then how do we leverage things like Azure Synapse to get better analytics from our data, faster queries across petabytes of data, and really what fits our organization best? What gives us the most flexibility? What gives us the most security? And what makes sense from a cost perspective as well? So Azure SQL Database is your fully managed relational database as a service. The best and most economical cloud destination for your SQL database. Running on Microsoft SQL Server Engine means it has high performing, reliable, and secure. Use it as a data-driven application website in the programming language of your choice without needing to manage the infrastructure. You can save time and resources by seamlessly migrating SQL Server data in the cloud via a managed instance for a full SQL Server programming surface area that removes the need for re-architecting your application. Now, when migrating to SQL Server workloads from a SQL database managed instance, there's a couple considerations to take. Microsoft can offer an economic incentive, such as Azure hybrid benefits, to actually reduce the cost of the SQL licensing. So you can purchase your SQL licensing upfront rather than on a pay-as-you-go model. I know that a lot of organizations look to move to the cloud because you're operationalizing your consumption or your infrastructure cost. But there are aspects when moving to the cloud that make more sense to look at it more of an upfront, possibly capital investment on purchasing licensing or committing to compute. And that's when you're moving an application or a workload that is not necessarily a temporary workload, but a long-term workload. Maybe it's a key application as part of your company's SaaS solution. This isn't going to go anywhere for as long as the company is here. You can actually purchase that reserved instance or that take advantage of the Azure hybrid benefits in a 3-year advance. Or a 1-year option, as well as the some of the compute there. So you're making that commitment and receiving a cost benefit. Another thing is the SQL database breakthrough productivity and performance meets the demand of today's apps. Each database is isolated and portable, each within its own service tier and guaranteed performance levels. Different performance levels of different needs, enabling the pooling of databases to maximize resources and investment. And so you can really take advantage right down to individual databases. And within a within a SQL managed instance, you can actually house up to 100 databases. So Coretek's cloud migration methodology, it really starts, we break it up into 5 phases, and we start with the assessment. In the assessment phase, we get into motivations on what is the critical business event, such as a data center exit, or that there's new data sovereignty requirements, kind of to name a few. And then why are we migrating? Is it a cost savings? Is it that we're scaling to meet geographic demand? Or maybe it's an innovation. Maybe we're building new technical capabilities and we can streamline those by native Azure offerings. Or maybe we're transforming our product or service in what we do as an organization that we need to take advantage of Azure for scalability. So it's really, we look at why are you moving? What is really driving the business to look at Azure? Next, we really focus in on what are the business outcomes? What are we trying to achieve? Is it that financial outcome for operationalizing our consumption or our infrastructure? Is it that we're trying to expand our customer base? Is it we want to keep data close to our customers, and we're now not just based here in the US, but we're expanding to Europe or Asia Pacific? And then performance outcomes. Work with a number of companies that actually, during a busy season, will increase the compute power of their workloads to get better performance, and then reduce it back down for cost optimization during when they're outside of their busy seasons. So what are we trying to really achieve as part of this cloud journey? And really, what the assess phase is focused around is the Azure economic assessment. And we do an assessment of your digital estate, so all assets within your environment. And we look at 5 different key areas. We're looking at cloud readiness. How ready is this workload for moving to Azure? And really, is it 100% ready for rehosting, where we can just take it as it is and move it up to Azure? It'll identify different workloads that require rebuilding or refactoring because maybe they're on an outdated version of server OS. And then also it identifies some prioritization, so we can see low-hanging fruit. Maybe there's some SQL 2008 servers out there that we can quickly move to Azure and take advantage of the extended support that is free in Azure for Server 2008. The other piece is understanding the cloud economics. So understanding cost benefits. What would this be if we were to purchase reserved instances for these workloads that are always on? Or how much would it be for us to take advantage of Azure hybrid benefits with our software assurance licensing? Or what is our gap from our software assurance licenses that we have today for our on-prem environment when moving to Azure? The second piece of the migration methodology is going to be the cloud adoption framework. So the first, we've looked at what is it going to cost for us to run our workload in Azure? What are ways that we can make commitment and savings for that total cost of ownership? Now it's, how is this going to function? What is the best place for our data to land in Azure? How do we develop governance? How do we establish security? How do we handle role-based access? That's really what the cloud adoption framework is designed for. It's getting into the details of what is this data center now going to look like in Azure, and how do our policies and procedures change to at least meet or exceed what we're doing on-prem today. The next piece is migrating. So now we've assessed, we understand the cost. We've developed a plan. We've got Palo Altos in place for our firewall set up in high availability. We have role-based access set up. We have governance with Azure Blueprint, and we have Azure monitors set up with Sentinel. We're now going to be ready to move production workloads into Azure. And really, it's choosing the right database that fits your needs. So we talked about SQL Server on Azure. So this is taking SQL as you manage it today, and really it's very familiar for a lot of organizations because it's managing the SQL application with your database on a VM in Azure. So you're handling the OS and up. The next is moving into or looking at the Azure SQL managed instance. So this is, if you're looking for a scenario where all you have to worry about is your data and how your applications reference that data, this would be the answer for you. You don't have to worry about patching SQL. You don't have to worry about redundancy of your data, because the Azure SQL Managed Instance handles all of that for you. The SLAs are already predetermined, and even disaster recovery, your SQL Managed Instance can have a sister image for active SQL databases in another region. So you can set that up within the managed instance. And then the third option is the Azure SQL Database, which is best for modern cloud applications. So the managed instance, and really the next slide goes into the details of understanding what the difference is. But with the managed instance, you can get a SQL instance level features. So you can get data down, or you can get, get metrics down to the actual SQL instance that would make up your database. Or in the Azure SQL Database, you're really looking at performance and security of your database overall. So database migrations to Azure provide a prescriptive guidance on how to do the migrations. Customers have access to case studies of migrations that other customers already did. So we've done a number of these migrations, and we can really help you and guide you through that journey in moving your data up to Azure, and give a full list of partners that they can contact to get assistance in doing the migration. So we can work with you and understand exactly, maybe you have applications that, how do we move this application with its database up to Azure? We have the ability to work with you guys to pull in those vendors of those applications and really see what is the best place for this data to land, and so that we can really take advantage of what Azure has to offer for optimized and data performance. So rehost or lift and shift migration, often, again, the quickest way to get your data up to Azure. And we do often recommend this way of getting the data, getting it up to Azure quickly, and then we can optimize and modernize once it's in Azure. It's a little bit easier to work with the data straight from Azure than it is sometimes to try to re-architect what you're doing and how your applications work as part of the migration. So we sometimes look at it, and again, it's case by case, but we sometimes look at it as let's get the data into Azure first, and then let's understand how we can optimize and improve and re-architect our database in our application. The next piece is, and really the next two pieces are not necessarily a destination, but a journey, because we're constantly going to have to manage this environment that's now in Azure, and we're going to be constantly looking at optimizing, but first managing it. So again, it all comes back to the people. So understanding your app portfolio and making sure that you have the right resources and you understand their roles and responsibilities for managing and supporting this Azure environment, and really taking the early steps of developing a cloud center of excellence. So what workloads, what types of workloads are going to be where, leveraging things like infrastructure as code for repeatable, removing human error, but repeatable deployment of certain resources in Azure is all key in developing a cloud center of excellence. When it comes to the tools that Azure offers natively for managing an Azure environment or an Azure data center, there are a number, and there's really 5 key pillars of governance Deployment acceleration. So how do you handle templates, be it an ARM template, or if you're using Terraform to develop infrastructure as code? How do you manage it? What are your tools? What are the scripting languages that you're using, and keeping it consistent? The next is the identity baseline. So what identity solution do you use? Making sure that you're, again, consistent across deploying and naming of resources, and how you go about expanding and growing your Azure environment. Again, resource consistency, what tools are used for which operations of management and monitoring. So resource consistency can be IP schemas, naming conventions, how you, where you store passwords in a key vault, maybe, and really having a sound and a tested disaster recovery plan. And then security baseline. So how are you handling security? How are you handling role-based access? Security baseline for really the entire environment. So treating it as a data center rather than just an area where you can deploy resources. And then cost management. What considerations are you taking? How are you evaluating cost, monitoring, and limiting spend? Coretek, actually, for our CSP customers, has developed an Azure management suite, and we have done one of our Tech Tuesday webinars just on the Azure management suite. If you guys do have challenges with monitoring cost spend or creating alerting to allow your team to know how much they're spending or consumption that they're creating in Azure, I highly recommend that Tech Tuesday webinar. And then the fifth is optimize. So we break down optimize into modernizing applications, cost optimization, performance optimization, and then operationalizing security. So all things that need to be constantly looked at, and considerations need to be taken, because Azure's constantly releasing new tools, new features, new services that can allow you to adapt and even fine tune or achieve new levels of performance or security or cost optimization. One thing that we do as an organization is we have an app modernization workshop. So we can actually come in and look at 1 to 5 simple applications that your organization may have, and really understand how it's architected, the capabilities of Azure, and how we can really streamline your application for running in Azure. Maybe it's moving it from an IaaS SQL database into a managed instance, and then using Azure App Services, referencing that data rather than traditional IaaS model. So we can really look at how your application works, what are some of the bottlenecks that your application is seeing today, and how we can leverage PaaS services from Azure to modernize that application. And the other piece here is really modern data warehouse approach. So you heard me mention Azure Synapse Analytics before. So you have your data, and really you're ingesting your data through Azure Synapse Analytics and storing it in maybe a data lake. That data lake then can work again with Synapse Analytics to present the data. So the Synapse Analytics not only helps with data ingestion, but it also is being used for reporting and moving that data into potentially a Power BI for getting very quick, so high performance reports on what you're trying to view or what you're trying to show your customers or present from your application. So we have another offering, so like the application modernization simplified offering, where we look at modern data warehouse approach. So really work to envision a planned architecture and security to understand a broad integration and connection points of your application. And in this 2 to 3 week engagement, we're going to be demonstrating one simple data transformation. So we'll be creating one simple Power BI report to demonstrate how data can move from end to end based on some current kind of recommendations of how you're actually using your database today and your end-to-end flow of data, and how we can actually transform that with a modern data warehouse approach. And then as far as next steps, so there's a couple different engagements that we talked through today. One of them was the Azure Economic Assessment. So if your organization is really in the infancy of understanding what they have and what that might look like in Azure, I would highly recommend you start with the Azure Economic Assessment. That's where we understand total cost of ownership and help you get some very entry-level understandings of what's available from Azure, from a service and where your data can land. For an organization that's really committed to moving to Azure, they've made the decision, but they don't know where to start, the Cloud Adoption Framework is that starting point. So for this, again, we're going to be looking at how your data center works and functions today, and making sure that we show you with Azure native tools or some third-party tools when it comes to firewalls, like a Palo, but we'll show you how you can meet or exceed what you're doing on-prem today, and all of the capabilities of your environment moving into Azure and what you can do, and really starting to lay down the ground, the framework for a data center in Azure. The third was the application modernization engagement. Again, 1 to 5 simple applications modernized, leveraging Azure native capabilities and platform as a service. And then we talked about the modern data warehouse POC. We have a download for a white paper for Azure migration strategies. And at this point, Kevin, I don't know if we have any questions out there. I know we're a couple minutes over.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like we've had any submitted at this time. But we will be sending out both the recording and the slide deck. So if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and reply to that email. The recording will be coming from myself, so I can definitely help get you connected with Robert, and we can certainly get any questions answered. So whether you were here today and just didn't have time to get your question in, or if while watching Robert's presentation you come up with something, we'll get you the answers you need. Just go ahead and hit reply on the email. But Robert, I do want to thank you for taking the time to go through here. A lot of great information. And I know we have the 3 offers there. So certainly, whether you're interested in one of those offers, if you have a question, whatever else it may be, like I said, we will be sending out both a copy of the slide deck and a recording. So you have the ability to refer back to it, but then please don't hesitate to reach out to either Robert. He included there'll be a link to his LinkedIn profile page inside of the slide deck, or again, you can just hit reply on the email and that'll take you right back to my email, and we'll get you routed accordingly. Want to thank everybody for tuning in who tuned in live, and we will catch you during next week's Tech Tuesday webinar. We're taking a look at Citrix and SD-WAN there, so if you haven't had a chance to register for that yet, be on the lookout for invites, but and register if you haven't had a chance to. But until the next one, want to thank everybody again and wish everyone a fantastic afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.